My name is Mehdi Hasan. I'm the host, editor-in-chief, CEO of Zeteo. I'm joined for this election dialogue on Substack, finally at 8:15. We are 15 minutes late to talk about the most important topic in America. Tells you everything by the one and only Steve Schmidt from The Warning on Substack, former GOP strategist, White House strategist, never Trumper. Steve, how are you feeling about this election? It's 8:15. We were supposed to start at 8. Everything in life is stressful right now.
Everything is stressful. We're a little bit behind, but thank you everybody out there for joining. When we talked about doing this, what we decided we were going to talk about was fascism,
Yeah.
and this threat. Talk about it as a fascist threat. Talk about the media that hasn't called this out for what it is. And so it was providential almost that the news today is John Kelly, the former Marine four-star general, the White House chief of staff, comes out. There's audio recordings, and he makes it clear he's a man who knows history, knows something of the world, knows something of the wars of the 20th century. And he says the guy I worked for as chief of staff is an autocrat, is a fascist who doesn't believe in democracy. It's a big deal.
Yeah. It's a very big deal, but you might not believe it from the front pages of the national newspapers today, because I believe it didn't really make the top headline on any front page in America, which tells you everything about 9 years in. Our media is still very broken. It's the reason I went and set up my own media company. When I launched Zeteo, Steve, people said, why are you doing your own media company? And I said, two reasons. Number one, and it's probably one you disagree with me on, and we could have another conversation about this, is the genocide in Gaza. And number two is the fascist threat here in America. People don't use the G word, genocide. They don't use the F word, fascism. And in August 2020, Steve, I did my first ever show on MSNBC. I guest hosted for Chris Hayes. And it was just after Portland and the George Floyd riots, the protests, the attacks, police grabbing people off the street. And I said, this is fascism. And I used the F word that night. And people thought I was being hysterical. People said, this is Trump derangement syndrome. He's not a fascist. Stop misusing words. This is hyperbole. And yet here we are 4 years later. 4 years later. And as you say, Marine General, former Chief of Staff, John Kelly, saying he's a fascist. Not just John Kelly. Mark Milley, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Trump's top general during his term, says he is a fascist to the core. Right? This is what's going on right now. Two American generals, not Democrats, not liberals, not leftists, generals, small C conservatives, maybe big C conservatives, saying the guy they worked with for several years is a fascist. How is that not the biggest story in America, Steve? Why is it not on every front page?
I don't have an answer for that other than that all of these news organizations are corporate owned, and that at a corporate level, there's a tremendous amount of fear from a litigation perspective, which is a false fear. The lawyers are in the room, or from a retaliation perspective. You know, if you're the CEO of Comcast, you have a lot of equities for your business that involve license issues with the FCC. You know, MSNBC is a very small piece, right? Of your really a negligible piece of your bottom line. So, are you going to allow an outspoken host to tank your business because the guy in the White House is making very clear if he's offended by anybody on the air, he's going to try to remove the license. He's going to try to take some punitive action. He may punish them on some merger that's declined. But whatever it is, very quickly, fear is attendant with fascism, right? It's hand in glove. And so you have reporters who are afraid. You have retired generals who are afraid. I thought one of the most remarkable stories this month was Mitt Romney, Republican nominee for president in 2012, and he's talking about, I can't protect my grandchildren from the retribution that's coming under Trump's doctrine of collective punishment. So it is extraordinary, and I don't understand the judgment that doesn't lead the news with experts, with on the front page that describes what this is, that explicates it, because it's deadly.
It is, and Mitt Romney, by the way, of course, we know from the Atlantic piece that McKay Coppins did for the book, was spending thousands of dollars of his own money to protect his family after the impeachment vote. And he pointed out that a lot of House Republicans said they couldn't pay that money to protect their family, so they voted not to impeach Donald Trump because they literally feared for their life. That should have been a bigger story, that in the United States of America, members of Congress were unable to vote to impeach a president from their own party because they thought they were going to get killed. One Republican whose name I forget, was it Don Bacon? I can't remember which Republican one, says his wife started sleeping with a gun next to her bed. Insane times, right? Insane to see this in the United States of America. By the way, I would say one thing about the media folks. The folks who are, and by the way, we've got 770 people joining right now. Appreciate you all joining us. Loads of you are leaving comments. There's far too many to read them out all at once. But Clive says he didn't know we were doing a chat. He found us by accident. He's glad we did. I think we got to this. I think we got to this chat by accident as well. So I'm glad we got here. Penny Howell says, "Did I miss anything?" No, you didn't. We just got started, Penny. And somebody else says, "Love both of you guys." I can't remember their name, but thank you very much. So back to the chat. Look, Steve, my position is, the people who are afraid, okay, you're afraid, right? And there are journalists who are afraid, there are politicians who are afraid. They're not the ones I'm really bothered by. I'm worried about the ones who are just in denial, right? There are people out there, Steve, on the left and the right, who even today, I was talking to a friend of mine recently. He said, "Oh, he's not Hitler. He's not quoting Hitler. Just stop it." There are people who say you're just exaggerating. It's hyperbole. And look, I'm in a Muslim community and in a left movement that's very unhappy with Kamala Harris right now, as you know, over Gaza, and rightly so in my view. And a lot of them say we can't vote for Harris. And I'm having these debates about, do you vote for Harris? That people want to vote third party. But the people who say they're voting Trump, I say, are you crazy? Like, Trump is worse on every level, including for Gaza. And they say, "Oh, Mehdi, you're exaggerating." And I just think at this point, the guy's defense secretary says he's not unfit for office. His national security advisor says he's not fit for office. His economic advisor says he's dumb as shit, right? His chief of staff says he's a fascist and he worships Hitler. His head of the joint chairman of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff says he's a fascist to his core. Go through the list. His press secretary, his deputy press secretary, his people who worked closest with him are saying the guy's unfit for office. The guy's a threat to democracy. Trump himself keeps going on Fox. Steve, have you seen these clips on Fox where Fox hosts say, "You didn't really mean to threaten all those people, right?" And he goes, "Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did." They try and walk him off the ledge. Have you seen Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity? They're like, "You didn't really mean to
Yeah.
be a dictator." He goes,
She's
"No, I
like,
didn't."
and she's like, and Laura Ingraham is right 3 questions in with him, and she's basically, no, no, you don't mean that. You don't
Like,
mean
yes,
that,
I
right?
fucking
You can't say
do.
that. No, he's not. When he's and Trump's response was, no, no, we got to do it. We
Yes.
got to do it. We got to punish him. We
Even
have to.
Fox is like trying to downplay this shit.
Right.
And I think it'll be the first time someone took over a country and brought in authoritarian rule without hiding it. Right? I think Viktor Orban and Narendra Modi and all these other authoritarian leaders we look around the world, they kind of hit their motives and continue to do so. Trump is the first person I can think of in a long time who's like, yeah, I want to be a dictator and I want to terminate the Constitution. And guys, if you vote for me, you don't have to vote for me again in 4 years. I mean, he's saying it out loud. I don't know what else to say. I'm losing my mind at the complacency and the inertia and the denialism of some in our media and in the general public who say, nah, he doesn't mean it.
Well, there's a couple things. Everyone. I say this all the time on the warning. Mehdi and I have talked about this, which is that there is nobody ever in all of history who has made the threats that Trump is making who didn't follow through on them upon taking power. Exactly nobody. Every person who's ever taken political power, riding to power on the crest of a wave of threats and vengeance and grievances and all of it, has always done exactly what they said they were going to do. And so we have this threat that is treated invisibly by the media, that's downgraded. I mean, I think that one of the things that you said is very right. It's this. I've called them for a fascist for a long time now, because historically I know what a fascist is. I understand what fascism is, and it was the right thing to call him. When you call him that precisely, you are accused of being crazy,
Yep.
being hyperbolic, being deranged, being lost, which is another common fascist tactic, right? That the opposition is always illegitimate, not necessarily because it's wrong, But in fascism's take, because you're sick, because you're crazy, because you're disordered, which is why in fascist systems, so many political opponents wind up in mental institutions. Um, one of the things that I thought was extraordinary 4 years ago, and the Lincoln Project is a very different deal today than it was, 4 years ago. There's an old saying, that every cause becomes a business, becomes a racket, and it crossed the racket line, some time ago with every penny goes into the pockets as opposed to the cause. But 4 years ago, when it was playing a big role in
Yeah,
the aftermath of the campaign, there were millions of dollars of flyers
yeah,
that were distributed in every zip code that I had ever lived in the neighborhoods of every person that I had ever known, calling me a pedophile. And so the revenge, right, that is directed at a person
yes,
for speaking out and up, which is your God given right in this country. So whether it's me a couple years ago, whether it's a bomb threat by Caesar Sayoc, the
yeah,
Trump bomber, the FBI at my house, I read today, Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This is a guy who 44 years of service to the country, who since leaving office has dealt with nothing but death threats
yeah,
directed at him by Donald Trump supporters. So there's this menace in the country,
yes,
this threat that's hanging over it, this threat of violence. And the lead political reporter of the New York Times, what Maggie Haberman says is, listen, the media doesn't have the tools, right, to cover this. We're just not equipped to do it 9 years in. And I think it's such nonsense. And the number one danger that the country is facing, like in this moment today,
yeah,
13 days out, is nobody can orient to the threat because the threat is almost never explained coherently
yes,
and clearly across a broad spectrum of media outlets as objective fact. Fascism is tangible, it's identifiable, it has a historical record. There are antecedents to the
yes,
things that Trump is saying,
yes.
and yet all of it is completely obliterated in the coverage. And yesterday's events are severed, disconnected
Yes,
from what they
exactly.
build to today. So
Exactly.
everything is covered as an episodic reality show.
100%. You're speaking my language, Steve. The way in which we do this as a half day, quarter day story and then move on and then don't join the dots. We don't talk about Trump. The quote I keep going on and on about is the man put on Truth Social, his ridiculously named social media site, that he's going to terminate the Constitution, right? That was what he said over a year ago, right? That should form the basis for every discussion. He has said on record he wants to terminate the Constitution. And therefore, everything flows from that. And somebody said in the chat, well, how can he do that? He's not going to do it on day one. No, he's not going to do it on day one. No one's suggesting he's going to do it on day one. No one's suggesting he's going to build a concentration camp on January 21st. Look at what Orban has done, who Trump worships, who the Republican Party worships. He has consolidated power. He shut down independent judicial institutions, universities, opposition centers of power, media outlets controlled by his friends, right? Using the instruments of the state like Modi in India to send the tax police after your opponents, which we know Trump tried to do in his first term to many people. And I think, look, this is a guy, as you say, the inability of the Times and CNN and NBC and all these media outlets to join those dots, to be clear to the public that this is not just some guy shooting from the hip, but he is a guy who's saying very clearly what he wants to do. He's surrounded himself with people who are of that ilk. There are no Jim Mattis's, John Kelly's, Mark Espers in term two. There is only the Rick Grinnells and the Kash Patels and the Michael Flynns who will be surrounding him, sycophants who believe in the authoritarian vision. And by the way, someone in the comments said earlier that they want this stuff. And I think that's a very underrated part of this story as well. That, for the majority of the country, if you tell them what Trump's up to, I think they will recoil from it. But there is a hardcore minority that actually wants this. That when you say Trump's going to be an authoritarian, they go, yeah. That's what we want. We want a dictator. We want a strong man to clean up the country, to fight crime, to secure the border, to own the libs. So when Trump talks about the left as vermin and lunatics and he's going to deploy the National Guard, that actually doesn't scare a lot of Americans, maybe 30%, 20% of Americans who say, yes, that is what we want. And I think that's where we have to not just join the dots day to day on the news, but globally too, right? Because this is part of a global authoritarian phenomenon. This is going on in Western Europe. This is going on in Eastern Europe. This is going on in India and Pakistan. This is going on in the Middle East. And I think we have to understand that there is this desire in times of chaos and uncertainty and financial insecurity and mass migration, where people are saying, you know what, we prefer the strong man who just cracks down. And I think that's still a minority in America. I do believe that to be the case. But yeah, the media has failed miserably. And it's amazing to me that the Kelly headlines are not the front page of every newspaper in America. Not just the front page, the relentless coverage, right? This is the point. When the media wants to do relentless coverage, it does relentless coverage. When bloody Bill Ackman was leading his crusade against Claudine Gay and Harvard and the Ivy Leagues over college protests, that was a relentless. You look at the New York Times, had like 17 stories on the front page on that one story, right? You had reporters live from the scene. It was a week by week, day by day, 24/7 cycle. And maybe you and I are on different sides of that debate, but the point is, it was a ridiculously overplayed story in the context of America today. The idea that we don't have that, look at the 24/7 coverage Joe Biden's age got, right? Look at he goes and he did a ridiculous debate. I came out that night and said he should probably stand aside. But you see, the coverage of Biden was intense, right? Multiple op-eds, editorials telling him to stand down, multiple guests on cable news. But we just don't get that with Trump, right? We don't. We compartmentalize. We do a day story and then we move on to the next thing. And that grading of him on a curve that has been the case since 2016 drives me insane. It helped him win an election in 16, and now it could help him win again in 24. The normalization of Trump.
Where are you right now? It's 13 days out. I'm not. This race isn't over. It's razor close. But are you feeling optimistic or
No,
pessimistic, or are
I'm
you?
super pessimistic. I don't think it's Trump's in the bag. I've never believed that. I've always believed it's a 50-50 election. But given it's a 50-50 election and it's on the knife edge, and my team and I today at Zeteo, we were like, should we do a feature on the district in Nebraska that could determine the entire election if the election's thrown to the House? Like, those are the discussions we're having about like 270, 270. Look, 269, 269. I do think it's anyone's race right now. It's 50-50. Clearly, on the vibes and the momentum, it feels like Trump has it right now. The Harris momentum and energy, I was at the DNC, seems to have faded. And again, this way maybe somewhere we disagree. I think her decision to go after Haley voters and campaign with Liz Cheney in Michigan, of all places, in the final 2 weeks was not a wise move, right? I know people in Detroit and Dearborn. There are people on this chat posting messages saying we can't vote for a genocidal candidate. Gaza is a huge issue for young voters, people of color, Muslim Americans, Arab Americans. If she's not going to shift policy on it, which she clearly isn't, the idea that you go campaign with Cheney, and by the way, Steve, we can laugh at Donald Trump being the dumbest man in the world, but when it comes to savvy messaging at the right time, you got to hand it to him. He's just put out a statement today, like he did yesterday, saying, why would Muslims vote for Harris when she's campaigning with Liz Cheney, who launches wars, and Dick Cheney, who did Iraq, right? That unfortunately penetrates into Muslim and Arab American communities. It works. We may remind ourselves that Donald Trump's the man who hired John Bolton. Donald Trump's the man who killed Qasem Soleimani. Donald Trump dropped the biggest bomb in America's arsenal on Afghanistan. Donald Trump almost started the nuclear war with North Korea. Unfortunately, Americans are amnesiacs. They bought into this bullshit that Trump's time was a time of peace. He was an anti-war president, all bullshit. But he is leaning into that. So I'm a little bit depressed and concerned. I worry where the energy's gone. I saw Tim Walz on the campaign trail just a couple of days ago calling Elon Musk a dipshit. I would like a bit more of that Tim Walz. I just want a bit more energy, speaking off the cuff, going out there and really, energy in some campaign. I don't need Hillary Clinton 2.0 from 2016. And that's why I'm worried we're heading in this last 13 days. I hope I'm wrong.
So let's play it out
Okay.
that Trump wins. It's almost certain at this hour that you're going to have a Republican Senate, though I think it's possible that Cruz goes down. So,
Inshallah, as we Muslims say.
Right, inshallah. So let's say we had a Republican Senate. We got Trump in the White House. You will see a repeal of the filibuster immediately. And all of these wacky Trump nominees who never would have been able to be confirmed are going to suddenly be confirmed into positions of grave responsibility. Democrats will control the House. They'll control the purse strings. I think there's 90 plus thousand governments that have elected governments in the United States. All of them have three lawyers. We're the most complex society on earth, right? So the descent into the Trump Reich is going to be bumpier than I think the MAGA fanatics think it is. That being said, you will have very quickly, I think, a purge in the military
Yep.
of senior officers. You'll have an absolute politicization. You'll have people like General Flynn. You'll have people like Kash Patel. You'll have people like Rick Grinnell. You'll have people like Stephen Miller. And
Yep.
you will very quickly have a law enforcement operation underway that is unprecedented in any of our lifetimes.
Yes.
I mean, we tend to skew a little bit older on these things. If you're a certain age in this country, you remember Elian Gonzalez,
Yes.
and so I'm looking forward to this playing out, right? 15 million times, right?
Insane.
It's obscene. It's insane.
But
It's
before you
crazy
even
at
before
every
you
level.
but before you even get to the deportations of undocumented, and of course we know that green card holders, permanent residents, US citizens will be dragged into that. Before we even get to that, I've been saying for a while that if he wins, he invokes the Insurrection Act. He puts the military on the streets on January 20th. What he wanted to do last time round, he had some resistance from the DOJ. Remember, they famously, we will all resign if you make the crazy guy AG. That's not going to happen this time. They've got their plans for the Insurrection Act. Again, this is not Mehdi Hasan leftist or Zeteo saying this. This is their own people saying this, right? They're saying this openly. This is what they've briefed to the New York Times. This is what the Center for Climate Reporting, the British outfit who secretly recorded the what's the name of the guy who was OMB, who might be chief of staff now? I forget his name. The guy who was head of Trump's OMB was saying on this secret recording, well, we've given him a 50-page dossier on how he can use the military from day one. He's going to put the military on the streets. And I keep reminding people of this. In 2020, in the summer of 2020, when there were people outside in Lafayette Square, Trump called Mark Esper and said, why can't you shoot them? Shoot them in the legs. Esper said, we can't do that, sir. Next time round, it will be Defense Secretary Michael Flynn or Kash Patel who says, yes, sir, whatever you say, sir. So when people say, well, Steve, I'm sure you get this a lot. People say, don't be silly. We already had Trump for 4 years. He didn't do anything crazy in the first term. He tried, right? We know he tried because the
There
people
you
around
go.
him say,
Right.
he tried. The thing is, we had a few guardrails, a few adults in the room. His administration will have no adults in the room next time. It will have literal children like Kash Patel, who writes children's stories about Trump. It will have a Supreme Court who are his and have told him he has immunity. It will have a Republican Senate, as you say, not led by Mitch McConnell. And it will have maybe, if he gets a Republican House, Steve, it's a trifecta. It's game over. There are no checks or balances. This is a guy, by the way, can you imagine going from Attorney General Merrick Garland, who dragged his feet for 4 years, to the AG who Trump will put in, a Mike Davis type, or even crazy Judge Janine from Fox, who's going to go from day one after Biden and Obama and Harris and Cheney and maybe me and you and everyone else, right? There's going to be, the projection is intense. All the things they've accused Democrats of, weaponizing power, deep state conspiracy, witch hunt, all of that is what they're planning to do, right? Every accusation is a confession for the right. So you know that everything they accuse the Democrats of is basically what they have planned. And I think, again, people don't recognize, I have a very wealthy, very intelligent, very educated liberal friend who told me recently, Mehdi, the bureaucracy will stop him. The courts will stop him. That complacency, I believe, is the greatest gift the Trump campaign could ever expect from the liberal left in this country. The idea that, and this goes back to the famous, it couldn't happen here. America, we're unique. We can't go fascist. This is what happens in banana republics and broken Eastern European countries. I'm telling you, as the immigrant American here, stop being so fucking navel gazing and, arrogant that America is somehow immune from historical, global, geopolitical trends. It is not. And the Constitution, as great as it is in many ways, was not designed with a Donald Trump in mind. That is very clear.
Nope. There's a great book that I just finished reading. It's called A Village in the Third Reich, and it's the story about the southernmost town in Germany. It's a ski town, and it's a story from 1917 to 1956, and it's the tale of what happens when fascism comes to your town. And let's just say it changed it forever, as it will in the United States. Trump is going to have a rally at Madison Square Garden, which was the site, very famously, of the Boone's Gathering. There's
Yeah.
a documentary called
Yep.
The Night at the Garden, but you have the George Washington banners that were flanking the stage that night, festooned with swastikas.
Yep.
And that event that night in 1939 was billed as a patriotic evening, right? And there's an apocryphal quote. I think it was attributed apocryphally to Sinclair Lewis. But when fascism comes to America, it'll be wrapped in the flag
Yep.
and carrying the cross. And we're certainly seeing that play out. If Trump loses, right? If he
Yep.
loses on election night, we'll hear from him like last
Yes.
time, before midnight, and they'll have an indication. The way this works is you'll have a really strong sense on the campaigns. I'll know, you'll know, very very early in the evening, which way it's breaking. Everyone in the newsrooms is going to know. They're going to be extremely cautious, right? Very
Yeah.
slow on calling the states, but
Yes.
there's a momentum to this. There is no real fraud in American elections. These are the cleanest, fairest elections in the world. Trump will go out sometime, if he's losing on election night, and start to seed the ground that the election was
Yes.
stolen.
Which is what he did last time, if you remember.
Do you think this time, right, that it's an all-in proposition, everybody crosses the river again, like we're doing this again? Or do you think there's a chance, and what do you rate the chance that it just deflates? That people just say, you know
Okay.
what, we're not, no. Like a Lindsey Graham, right, who you'd
Yeah.
expect to be
No, I
first
think
on
it's.
mind. And
I wish.
I don't want anyone to think I'm putting any eggs in the Lindsey Graham basket. I'm just
No,
saying.
I wish I could be in team deflation, but I'm not. And I think we've depressed a bunch of folks in the comments. I don't know if you're reading the comments, Steve. We're getting a lot of love from folks. So I'm just going to pass on people saying nice things. Although a couple of people pointed out that I wore a light shirt and now they can't read the comments. So I should have worn a darker shirt. Note to myself for a future Substack Live. We now have over 1,300 people watching. So thank you for joining us tonight. Look, I don't want to depress everyone in the comments. Andrew in the comments asked me if I know any nice English women that he can go get married to and move to the UK. Good luck, Andrew. Good luck. Jessica says, keep drinking. I'm Muslim, Jessica. I can't even drink away my sorrows. Look, I'm going to be more depressing, and I have to be because I have to be honest with you. I think Trump is going to definitely on the night come out and say, we've won. He's going to do the whole red mist bullshit, which is, we're in the lead tonight on the counting of votes. Don't let them in the morning show that I'm behind. It's all rigged, even though we know that Republican legislatures in places like Pennsylvania don't allow the votes to be counted when they come in mail-in ballots. Just remind everyone of that. You'll hear a lot of bullshit online from people like Cat Turd saying, why can't we count all the votes on the day? Because Republican legislatures blocked us from doing that. Funnily enough, in Florida, they actually do allow you to count mail-in ballots from the moment you get them. So they actually count quite fast in Republican Florida, but not in the swing states where the Pennsylvania legislature and others have stopped that. So we're going to have Trump do that. He's this time, unlike last time, he's going to have Vance at his side. Unlike Pence, Vance is going to be backing him up, doing the media rounds, pushing this bullshit. By the way, Steve, doesn't it infuriate you that when Vance goes on all these Sunday shows and is asked, you wouldn't have certified the election on January 6, 2021, he goes, no, Pence had the power to stop it. He should have stopped it. Why doesn't a single anchor say to Vance, if that's the case, on January 6, 2025, does current Vice President Kamala Harris have the power to throw out a Trump victory and declare herself president? No one asked that question. Because if the Vice President has the power, then surely Kamala Harris can decide whatever the fuck she wants on January 6th, 2025. Anyway, that's an aside. To go back to your point.
But listen, like I think you're a really smart guy, right? And I think you ask great questions. But you don't have to be Albert Einstein to figure out that question, right? Like if you're doing this, right?
Yeah, it's
that
obvious.
is that is it. If you sit around for 5 minutes,
Yeah,
and you're like, I'm going to ask questions that challenge the inherent contradictions because it's all
yes,
nonsense. It's all nonsense.
yes. The simple answer to
And
your
then
question is the people who do these interviews are trained to do them in a certain way. They're not ready for Avance. They're not ready for the nihilism. They're not ready for the gaslighting. They're not ready for the gish galloping. They come from a world where they're just culturally and socially not ready for the freaks who go on Sunday shows from MAGA and get in
Yeah.
their face and lie all day long. They just don't have the tools for it. To go back to something you said earlier, the media has not adapted over 9 years. Well, some have. You now see George Stephanopoulos do a bit more pushback than he did before, but they still haven't adapted to how you deal with the people who come on air and just say up is down, black is white, hot is cold. To go back to your point about the election night, though, I've just got to make an important point here. I think he will do what he did in 2020. And this time round, he will have way more support than he had in 2020 because he spent 4 years building to this moment. The Republican Party is ready to fall in line behind him. The few dissenters that were there in 2020 are no longer there, right? They've quit the party, they've left the scene, they have no credibility. The party is more fearful of him, to go back to our earlier conversation about standing up to him. His base are way angrier than they were last time. They're full of rage and paranoia that they were robbed in 2020. We will not be robbed again. And don't forget, his great, his trump card for Trump is this time he controls the world's biggest social media platform, the most influential one in terms of politics, and that is Twitter, right? Last time round, January 6th happened, and Zuckerberg suspended him, and Dorsey and Twitter suspended him. This time round, Zuckerberg's running for the hills. He's already rolled over. And Musk is 100% on Team Trump, wants a government job, is spending millions of dollars, is living in Pennsylvania. So God help us all. We think about Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, the two election workers from Georgia who had to go into hiding because of the death threats they got from false allegations about suitcases of votes. They just won a case against Giuliani again the other night. By the way, Giuliani said on election night, a drunk Giuliani told Trump, go out and declare victory right now, if you remember. So if you look at Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, it'll be Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman times 100, Steve. It'll be all over Twitter. It'll be all over social media. Fake stories out of Wisconsin, out of Pennsylvania, out of Georgia, which will be amplified by the world's richest man to 200 million people with no community notes, no corrections. So we're in a very different place to 2020. The media may be slightly more, aware of what's going on than they were in 2020, but you've got social media in chaos. You've got Musk sowing chaos. And you've got a much angrier group of people who are going to be way more violent. January 6th is going to look like a walk in the park compared to what these guys are going to incite this time around. The idea that Donald Trump will concede to a black woman is the stupidest, dumbest thing I've ever heard. He will not.
So what happens?
As I say, it's going to be much more violent than last time. I don't think they're going to wait till January 6th. We're already seeing domestic terror. Let me give you one example. As private citizen Donald Trump, he shut down the entire town of Springfield, Ohio, shut down the schools, shut down the town hall, 30-odd bomb threats, the Haitian community in fear, kids at school in fear, Republican officials in the town saying, what the hell have you done? That is the power of Donald Trump as a private citizen. Can you imagine Donald Trump as a wannabe president-elect or president? Can you imagine him post-election inciting hate against a town or election worker or election supervisor in some county of America? I think he's going all in. It's his last chance to avoid prison. It's his last chance to be president. And as I say, his ego does not allow him to accept that he was beaten by a black woman who he thinks he uses all sorts of words for her in private and public. He will not accept defeat. And I think this time round, the levels of violence and violent threats, I'm sorry to say, will be much worse. America is primed for much more violence than it was in 2020 or 2016.
So I agree with you. But I just at a basic personal level, philosophy of life. Everybody, and it's good if this happens at a younger age, needs to hear the word no.
Yeah.
Trump has never heard the word no. It's never stuck. No one has told him no in 9 years.
Yeah.
What I think is one of the most amazing aspects of this whole period is Brett Baer. When you go back, full stop, and this doesn't get enough attention.
Yes. What he did on election night 2020.
He was afraid
yes.
to report
Arizona
the news to the audience.
Yep.
Right. So I'm just gonna take that at face value. I'm gonna try to curtail my emotions on it, right? My detestation of it, and say, okay,
yeah,
you whip these people up so much.
Yep.
You literally can't report the news to them. but just pushing on, right? You're going to have to report the news to them, right? There's no avoidance of reality, right? So the news,
I think
if
you're
the
being
news
generous to
is
Fox, Steve. I think you're being generous to Fox. They can avoid reporting the news. They're very good at that.
if the news is she wins, right? She's been elected president,
Yeah, but don't forget,
and
Steve, in this country, we have this weird system, which is weird. I'm not agreeing with the right here. It's something that's gone back decades. It's not a right or left point. But we have a system where we don't have a federal election system. We don't
right,
have a common standard of elections. Unlike in other countries, there are not independent third party people who decide this stuff. And we have this weird situation where everyone just accepted it until 2020 that the TV networks will decide the election. And in 2020, the Saturday after, the TV networks gave it to Biden. What if Fox doesn't fall into line this time? Fox has always prided itself on having that, I've forgotten his name, the guy Arnold, whatever his name is, who calls the election desk for
he's
them.
gone, right?
And yeah, I don't know who's left there. And we know that
No.
Trump is now calling Rupert Murdoch directly. We know that Lachlan Murdoch is fully Team Trump. We know that the Brett Bears were scared last time. So yeah, what if Fox says no? What if Twitter and Elon Musk says no? What if there's insufficient people to say? I think you might be generously underplaying how resistant tens of millions of
Well,
people will be in this country to reality.
so if you have, this is my point I'm trying to get to. So if you have the person who wins lawfully, as a matter
Yes,
of reality, she wins,
yes,
right? Regardless of what Elon Musk
yes,
says, right? Whatever he
yeah.
says
The
on
Electoral
Twitter,
College meets in December,
she's the
says it's her.
president elect.
Yeah,
We have procrastinated on dealing with the reckoning in this country. So we're going to have to tell, right, some number of maybe tens of millions of people,
yep,
no,
yep,
the loser can't be your Fuhrer
yep,
and dictator of America because he lost the election.
yep.
And no, right? And so we are. It seems to me on the edge now of this crisis that there's no escaping from.
Yes.
Right? There's a terrible
Yes.
existential crisis if he is elected president,
Yes.
but there's a profound crisis
Yeah.
if he loses the
Agreed.
presidency.
Win or
Right?
lose, this country's in a lot of trouble. And I'll tell you what, on nights like this, I think one man I blame a great deal for it. Very nice man. I'm sure he's a great guy personally and has great intentions, but he really effed us, is Merrick Garland. Because the reason why so many people are able to go into this election still saying bullshit about the last election is because Donald Trump was not prosecuted for the last election. We didn't get Jack Smith in court laying out in meticulous detail every day to a jury of his peers on nightly news all of the evidence that they have on Donald Trump and his incitement of insurrection and the fact that he knew that he lost and all the lies that he told and all the pressure he applied behind the scenes and all the violent threats and all the fake elector schemes. The fact that we are going into an election in 13 days' time, 4 years on from an insurrection that the Republican Senate leader, the Republican House leader all say Trump did. The fact that we are going into this election and Donald Trump was not prosecuted for anything in that. The fact that we heard the man on the phone say to the Republican Secretary of State of Georgia, find me 11,000 votes, and that Georgia trial didn't happen, to me is one of the great derelictions of duty by the political class, the judiciary, and to many ways the media. And I do think you wouldn't have persuaded tens of millions of MAGA folks with a trial, but you certainly would have reminded people of the stakes in this election, right? And that's what we
You
don't have right now.
you could not be more correct about it. It is unspeakable, and history is going to be extremely unkind to Merrick Garland on it. It is inexplicable. The entire country, its existence, right, is dependent on this peaceful transition of power. It's a wonder of the world. It's the greatest invention in American history. You know, George III was obsessed with what Washington would do. And he asked, would he have an empire bigger, a kingdom larger? And when he was told that Washington was going to go home to Virginia, he said that that would make him the greatest man of
Yeah,
that or any age. He could not comprehend it. You look at the painting by Turnbull in the Capitol
yeah.
of Washington in an act of humility, bowing to the Congress. He's laid his military cape over the large chair that is the throne unsat in. The structure of our society is entirely, absolutely dependent on elections where the people decide
Yes.
who has limited power lawfully for a period of time in a system that protects the individual as supreme.
Yeah.
And fascism is a dogma that places the individual
Yes.
as a cog underneath the state. It's exactly opposite of the American system. But what I've not been able to understand over all these years is what you're talking about. There is no substitute for the cornerstone. You can't take away elections and have someone impose political control on the country and allow the United States to still exist. It doesn't. The country stops. It
Yes,
ceases.
which is
Right?
why we use the phrase existential threat to America. It's about the existence, not just a threat to democracy. It's an existential threat to democracy because America cannot continue to exist as we know it if Trump is in power, destroying the Constitution, staying on. I just say a few things about the transition of power. Number one, Richard Nixon famously loses to John F. Kennedy in the dodgiest of ways. I think it's fair to say Nixon is the sitting vice president. We all talk about Mike Pence and the power Mike Pence has. Richard Nixon stands and says, transition of power is what makes America great. He says this in the Senate in January, whatever it was, and hands over power, right? Al Gore, we know, in 2000, beaten, I would say, illegitimately by your former boss, but still says, you know what, America, this is what America's about. And now you have this Trump and Vance saying, well, Pence can overturn the election, but Kamala Harris can't. And it is a real stark warning that even Richard Nixon had more integrity and more understanding of American politics and democracy than Donald J. Trump. And the failures to prosecute Trump, like the failure to prosecute Nixon, is what led us here. And you said history will judge Merrick Garland. Our commenters, I don't know if you're reading the comments, they're judging Merrick Garland pretty harshly right now. William Burke says, do we have any evidence that Merrick Garland is even still alive? Which I think is a fair question. In fact, by the way, on Garland, Steve, I don't know if you saw, they've just sent the DOJ a very stern letter to Elon Musk saying, if you're buying votes, that's against the law. You might go to prison for 5 years. That's it. No investigation, no threat of prosecution, just a very stern letter. You know what the Democrats are best at in life? Very sternly worded letters. That's what they bring. You bring what do they say? Don't bring a knife to a gunfight. They bring a sternly worded letter to a bazooka fight with fascists like Musk and Trump. And just on the transition of power, I want to say something to some of the leftists and some of the Muslims I know who are in this chat, who I've been talking with a lot in recent weeks. And there's real trauma on the left and in Muslim and Arab communities as to who to choose between Harris and Trump. And I know a lot of people on this call will say, don't be crazy. Of course, Trump is worse. But for a lot of people, there's a lot of hurt and pain. A lot of people in Michigan have lost 10, 20, 30 family members in Gaza. They say, we can't vote for someone who's arming this, who's complicit in this. And one thing I would say is you don't have to be pro-Harris or pro-Dems to understand the threat from Trump. The way I've been seeing this election is, who do you want to organize under? Who do you want to be able to resist under? Who do you want to be able to protest under? Even if you hate the Democrats and hate Harris and hate Biden, the reality is that next year, if you want to campaign for labor rights or climate or the Middle East, Gaza, you're going to be able to do it under a Biden or Harris. Are you going to be able to do under a Trump who says shoot protesters in the legs, who says if you protest for Gaza and you're a foreign student, I'm going to say you're Hamas and deport you from our country? That is not a world that I, as someone who is anti-big government, anti-oppressive government, anti our foreign policy, even if I don't like the president, even if I disagree with Kamala Harris on all of her foreign policies, I'll have a more freedom, and this is the argument I make, to speak out and say what I want to say under a normal presidency than under an abnormal presidency. And some folks, especially in the Arab community, say to me, well, if we defeat Harris now, we show our power and leverage and people will take us more seriously come 2028. And leftists say this too. And you know what I say, Steve? I say, how do you know there'll be a free and fair election in 2028? And I know some commenters listen, and people say, oh, you're being hyperbolic again. You're exaggerating. Of course there'll be an election in 2028. And I say, what in Donald Trump's biography tells you that this man in 28 says, all right, guys, it's been good. Had some fun. I'm going back to Mar-a-Lago to play golf. I'm done with all this politics stuff. In what world do you see a Donald Trump leaving office just going, yeah, I'm done. See you later, people. That he doesn't try and stay on, that he doesn't try and install a family member or a corrupt acolyte. This idea that there will be free and fair elections in 2028 after 4 more years of Republican Trump rule is delusional.
I'm with you. Because again, right, nobody has heard the word no. And so as you blow through these barriers, these norms, these traditions, once you get to the other side, anything is possible here. I want to make a point, a follow up on something that you said. You know, I have a unique experience in life. I was around two presidential transitions late into the night as we were arranging the concession for John Kerry to President Bush. But I was the person who placed the phone call from John McCain to Barack Obama. I was the first person in America who addressed Barack Obama and the Republican Party as Mr. President-elect.
Interesting. I did not
Right
know that.
before he handed the phone to
trivia.
McCain, and it was an extraordinary moment to play this small role at incepting this magic, which is the transfer of political power between generations, between political parties, between opponents, peacefully, directed by the sovereign will of the people. And Donald Trump is the first president who has taken a walk on it. And this goes to the DNA of the country. Let me say, you and I do have disagreements on the war in Israel, in the Middle East. It's a complicated issue, spanning from Tehran to Gaza. What I want to say, without getting into that debate on the election, there is no group in this country that is more vulnerable to a Trump administration than Muslim Americans, who have been treated badly in the country at times over the last 25 years, going back after 9/11, and all the people in that community on this call. I don't need to explain that to you. Donald Trump has a real animus for people of color,
Yes.
for blacks, for Muslims, and he's going to act on that malice. And anybody who thinks that they somehow are going to be safe from Trump,
yeah,
is very, very naive.
Yes.
Donald Trump doesn't care about abortion at all. But the religious extremists who he cares about because he wants their support care deeply about it. And so the big government that we're talking about tonight is the government that's peeking in your bedroom window, that's journeying with you from cradle to grave, that's policing your speech, that has an opinion about your employment, that makes a call if you're politically active. Hey, Mehdi's a problem at your company. Maybe he should lose his job because he said something that made the congressman mad, or the state senator mad, or whatever, wherever. So this is a moment where the core foundational element of what makes the country a free place, where you can come to the country as a Muslim and worship, or as a Jew, or as a Christian, the rights and the freedoms, the foundational freedoms, Trump disdains. And the people that he has malice for is to be very, very, very cautious as you process your decision about how to use this vote. There is no perfect candidate. No. There is no candidate you will agree with on every issue. And you can passionately have one. A lot of Republicans in the country, like myself, former Republicans, who never got on board with Trump, have a lot of disagreement with Kamala Harris on a lot of issues, but none of that matters, because the only thing on the ballot is the foundations of the country,
Agreed.
which he is the first president in history to openly communicate his intention to tear down.
No, I agree with you. And you know, if the candidate on the other side, and I say this to people who say we can't vote for Harris, I would say 100%. The genocide is so bad, and unlike you, I don't think it's complicated. I think it's a very straight moral issue. But I would say if the other candidate was George Bush Sr., let's say, I'd say, right, let it happen. Let her lose. Democrats need to learn a lesson. But the idea of losing to Donald Trump is not about losing to a Republican. It is losing to someone who, as you say, will be an existential threat to all of our freedoms of speech, assembly, protest. That for me is fundamental, right? Because I cannot advocate for the Palestinians or for undocumented immigrants or for any cause that I care about if I don't have free speech, if I don't have, the rule of law, if I don't have an independent judiciary. I mean, look at Elon Musk, who just goes judge shopping. He's got his favorite judge in Texas. Look at Trump, who's got his judge in Florida throwing out his case. That is banana republic stuff, right? This is the American judiciary now.
Absolutely.
The American judiciary now is a joke in the eyes of the rest of the world, not just the Western world, but Asian countries, African countries have more independent, more effective judiciaries than the United States judiciary right now, where you could literally pick your own judges. So I think that stuff for me is fundamental, right? I run a media company. I'm an immigrant. I'm a journalist. I'm a big mouth with opinions, right? For me to carry on existing as I exist, I need democracy to exist. And this is why, and I know we're at 9:05 and we've got 1,600 people watching. So we appreciate
Wow.
you all tuning in tonight. But this is where, this is where I really want to make a point before we finish, which is for me, the big failure of journalism is to treat this as an abstract issue, to treat this as we're just bystanders with a view from nowhere, looking out on this race between two horses, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, who's up and who's down. Journalism cannot exist as we know it in a Trump presidency. And by the way, people think I'm being exaggerating again. Go to Florida right now. Ron DeSantis' government is bullying TV channels into not running ads for an anti-abortion vote, right? That is what's happening in Florida right now. No one talks about it because we're obsessed with free speech on campus, but not an actual Republican government in Florida cracking down on the free press. Journalism cannot exist under an authoritarian regime. And therefore, when I see journalists act like disinterested observers, we're not biased. I've said this for 9 years. I'll say it again. Journalists should have a bias towards democracy, not big D Democrats, small d democracy. We have skin in the game, right? The fourth estate cannot exist without independent judiciary, without free and fair elections, without a Congress that isn't just a rubber stamp for an autocrat in the Oval Office. And that is what I fundamentally will always criticize our media for, is this inability to understand that we ourselves cannot exist if this guy gets his way.
100%. And I think one of the things to just add on to that is, we talked earlier about fascism, we talked about Hitler, and we talked about the Republican reactions just for a second, is when you call the MAGA movement appropriately fascist, right? It's hate speech, you're trying to get Trump assassinated, and across the board, all of it is nonsense. Adolf Hitler in 1923 tried to overthrow the Nazi German democracy. He was sent to prison. He served a short term, and when he was released, the New York Times announced that he had
Yes.
retired from
Yeah.
political extremism, and he
God
had
bless the New York Times.
right, and we had nothing more to worry about. His book, My Struggle, Mein Kampf, laid out very, very clearly what his intentions were. It took 9 years for Adolf Hitler to make that journey from the coup to the German chancellor's office. It took him 2 years to become the Fuhrer. It took him 7 years to start World War II. And it was 3 years after World War II started that there was a meeting in a Berlin suburb where the final solution was planned. It took a long time, almost 20 years, from the coup to the gates at Auschwitz opening. The journey is the lesson.
Mm.
And that's what matters here. Is Donald Trump going to open up an American Auschwitz? Of course not. However, we don't know where the story ends, just like the Germans didn't know where the story was going to end in 1937
Yes.
or 1938. It was going to get a lot worse. And so, 9 years in, Donald Trump at this hour is even in the race after trying to overthrow the government, promising retribution, promising vengeance, utilizing rhetoric and hate that is no different than anything that came out of the mouth of a Stryker or Goebbels about Haitians eating
Yeah.
cats and dogs. This is
Poisoning
ugly,
poisoning the blood of our country straight from
virulent,
Mein Kampf.
racist, fascist, poisoning the blood of the country. And so we're at a monumental moment in American life. We are in a vital hour of our nation's existence with a monumental threat that involves putting together a coalition that is very broad, that includes a lot of people who disagree with each other on a lot of things, but
Yes.
have fierce agreement that we will defend each other's freedoms and rights completely, because freedom means freedom for everybody,
Yes.
not just the privileged clique that you may be part of. That's not how this country works. And so this is a monumental moment. I spent some time with some Republicans who disdain Trump, do not like Kamala Harris.
Yes.
They're not going to vote for Trump. I can't get them to vote for Kamala Harris. That's fine. Good enough.
Yeah.
Stay home. Don't vote. Right? So the Republicans in your
So
life, if you're watching this, right? If you can't make a vote for Harris and you can't make a vote for Trump, don't vote. Don't vote. Do
I'll tell
not vote for Donald Trump.
I'll tell you what, Steve. Just to put a pin in all this, and by the way, there's about nearly 1,700 of you watching, so we thank you all. Louisa says, "Thank you, Steve and Mehdi, for this conversation. We thank you for tuning in and listening to us scare the bejesus out of all of you, but it has to be done because it's true." And I know some of you are saying in the chat you're going to go off and have a very stiff drink after this. The Muslims on this chat are going to go off and pray for all of us. Let me end by saying this: two things. I often think we're in some crazy movie. I don't know if you saw the Daily Show this week. Jon Stewart talked about, is this like the dream from Dallas? How can this stuff be real, what we're going through? Maybe it's all a nightmare that we wake up from. But I'll tell you what, if it is a TV show, if somebody's written this out, like, that Jim Carrey movie, if we're all in the middle of a TV show, 20 years ago for a start, I'll say two things. One is, if the writers of that show came to me 20 years ago and said, Mehdi, 20 years ago when I was marching against the Iraq War, and said, in 20 years, you and a guy who works for George Bush will be in 100% agreement on the need to stop the guy from Home Alone 2 from a second term in office, I'd have said, shut the fuck up. You're insane. That's number one. And number two, the writers of this show are so insane that they sat in the writers' room and they said, we're going to have this autocrat run for office. We're going to have him quote Hitler. We're going to have the left and liberals say, this guy's like Hitler. But the best part of all is his running mate is going to be the guy who warned the country that he could be America's Hitler. That, for me, is the greatest of all ironies. I don't need John Kelly or Mark Milley to go back to the beginning of this conversation to tell me how dangerous Donald Trump is. Donald Trump's running mate warned us all that he could be America's Hitler. So we need to, I think, resist America's Hitler come November the 5th. That is my priority. I'll be doing that at Zeteo. Steve will be doing that at The Warning. Check out both of our newsletters and output on Substack. Thank you to Substack for hosting this election dialogue via this Substack Live. Please do become subscribers to The Warning and to Zeteo so that we can challenge the New York Times and the CNNs and the Comcasts of this world when they normalize fascism and when they, in Tim Snyder's words, obey in advance. Do support independent journalism going forward. Make sure you do vote and get your friends and family to vote. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mehdi. Good night, everybody. Please subscribe to Zeteo and to The Warning. Help support this message, this cause, and vote.
Good night.
Good night.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.